In 1949, a Hollywood director sent 10-year-old Natalie Wood across a bridge he knew was faulty. She nearly drowned, developed lifelong water phobia, and 32 years later, lost her life in the water under mysterious circumstances. Stolen fortunes, forced amphetamines, denied education, predatory access. Here are 11 things studios did systematically to virtually every child star that would be felonies today. They legally stole children's fortunes in 1935. 21-year-old Jackie Coogan walked into a bank to access his fortune. He'd been Hollywood's biggest child star, the boy who'd melted hearts alongside Charlie Chaplin in The Kid at age 7. By 18, he'd earned $4 million, the equivalent of over $60 million today, through films, endorsements, and vaudeville appearances. He'd supported his entire family for over a decade, paying for everything from their mansion in Beverly Hills to his mother's fur coats, his stepfather's business ventures, even his siblings' private school tuition. He'd signed autographs until his hand cramped. He'd smile for photographers when he wanted to cry. He'd worked when other children played. Now, finally a legal adult, he wanted to see the money he'd earned with his childhood. The bank manager looked uncomfortable. He shuffled papers on his desk. He cleared his throat twice. He adjusted his glasses. He asked Jackie to sit down. Jackie's heart started racing. Something was wrong. Then the manager showed him the account balance. The bank account was empty, not low, not depleted, empty, $0.00. Jackie stared at the statement, certain there had been a mistake. He read the number again and again. His hands started shaking. The paper trembled in his grip. His vision blurred. There had to be another account. His mother had invested the money somewhere safe, surely. She'd always told him not to worry, that everything was being handled, that he'd be taken care of when he turned 21. The bank manager shook his head slowly. This was the only account, and it had been systematically drained over the years, withdrawal after withdrawal, thousand after thousand, until nothing remained. The final withdrawal had been made just 3 weeks before Jackie's 21st birthday. His mother and stepfather had spent nearly everything, on automobiles, houses, parties, vacations, jewelry, and their own comfortable lifestyle. This wasn't just Jackie's money. This was his entire childhood. Years of 12-hour days, years of missing school, years of missing birthday parties and holidays and normal experiences, years of being a commodity instead of a child. All of it taken. When Jackie confronted them, his mother didn't apologize. She didn't show remorse. She didn't even seem to understand why he was upset. Her response became one of Hollywood's most infamous quotes. No promises were ever made to give Jackie anything. Every dollar a kid earns before he is 21 belongs to his parents. She actually believed this. She saw nothing wrong with what she'd done. In her mind, Jackie owed her for giving birth to him, for raising him, for managing his career, for the sacrifices she claimed she'd made. The money was payment for her services as a mother. She'd earned it. He was being ungrateful. Jackie sued his own mother. Would the court side with a child who'd worked since age 7? Who'd sacrificed his entire childhood, or with the mother who'd spent his fortune without saving a single dollar for his future? The 1938 lawsuit, Coogan versus Bernstein, revealed a shocking truth. She was legally right. Under California law before 1939, parents had complete legal control over every dollar their children earned. Studios paid parents directly. Children had no legal standing to claim money they'd earned. The court sided mostly with his parents. Of his $4 million fortune, Jackie Coogan received approximately $126,000, barely 3% of what he'd made. But Jackie wasn't even the first child star to suffer this fate. A decade earlier, Baby Peggy was one of silent film's biggest stars, a toddler who made over 150 films between ages 2 and 6. She earned approximately $1.5 million. Her father, a former cowboy and stuntman, controlled every cent. By the time Baby Peggy was 10 years old, her father had spent the entire fortune on failed business ventures and a lavish lifestyle. When her career ended at age 6, the studio dropped her without ceremony. By age 11, the child who'd earned over $1 million was living in poverty, moving from town to town as her family fled creditors. She went from silk dresses to secondhand clothes, from limousines to walking everywhere, from a bedroom full of toys to sharing a mattress with her sister. At age 7, baby Peggy found herself performing in vaudeville theaters where audiences booed her as too old and washed up. She was 7 years old and considered a has-been. Mickey Rooney earned approximately $12 million during his youth and teenage years at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. His father in the studio controlled his earnings. Despite bringing in massive income year after year, Rooney filed for bankruptcy multiple times as an adult. The money from his childhood had been spent by others while he was still too young to have any legal say. Studios deliberately paid parents rather than placing money in trust accounts, because parents who were financially dependent on their child's income would never remove that child from work. Once a family tasted that money, bought that house, established that lifestyle, they'd tolerate almost anything rather than give up the income stream. The public outrage over Jackie Coogan's case finally forced California legislators to act. In 1939, the state passed the Coogan Law, requiring 15% of a child actor's earnings to be placed in a blocked trust account. Just 15%. Parents could still legally spend 85%. And the law wasn't retroactive. It didn't help Jackie Coogan, baby Peggy, or any of the child stars who'd already been exploited. Baby Peggy lived to be 101 years old and passed away in 2020. She spent 80 years advocating for child actor protections and telling her story so that others might be spared what she endured. They used children in dangerous stunts without safety measures. In 1949, a bridge collapsed beneath 10-year-old Natalie Wood. The crew knew the bridge mechanism was faulty. Engineers had warned the production. The director filmed the scene anyway. Why? Studios routinely required child actors to perform their own dangerous stunts without safety coordinators, stunt doubles, or proper equipment testing. The reasoning was ruthlessly economic. Authentic reactions from real children facing genuine danger looked more convincing on camera. And if a child got hurt? Studios paid the medical bills, settled any potential lawsuits quietly, and kept filming. Child insurance policies and occasional injury settlements were cheaper than proper safety measures. 10-year-old Natalie Wood was filming The Green Promise. The climactic scene required Natalie to walk across a wooden bridge over rushing water while special effects triggered a dramatic collapse behind her. The crew knew the bridge mechanism was faulty. Engineers had warned that the collapse system was unreliable, that the equipment hadn't been properly tested, that the timing mechanism was inconsistent. The assistant director raised concerns. The crew looked nervous. Several crew members exchanged worried glances. One grip started to speak up, then stopped himself. Would the director delay filming for safety? Would anyone step in to protect this 10-year-old child? The director made a decision. Film the scene anyway. Production was behind schedule. Every delay cost money. They'd do one take. If it didn't work, they'd figure something else out. There was no stunt coordinator on set, no safety rehearsals. No one tested the bridge before sending a 10-year-old child across it. They called action. Natalie started across the bridge, taking careful steps on the wooden planks. Her white dress caught the California sunlight. The cameras rolled. Crew members held their breath. Then everything went wrong. The bridge collapsed early, not after Natalie had crossed to safety as planned, but directly beneath her small body. She plunged into the rushing water below, her scream cut short as she went under. Natalie couldn't swim. She thrashed in the water, panicking, her arms flailing as she tried to find something to grab onto. She went under again. Water filled her nose, her mouth, her lungs. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't tell which way was up. Everything was dark and cold. Her lungs burned. Crew members shouted and ran toward the river. By the time they pulled her out, coughing and gasping, she'd been underwater long enough to require emergency medical care. She was hospitalized, sobbing and terrified, begging anyone who would listen not to make her go back into the water. Please don't make me go back. Please. The production didn't stop. Once doctors cleared her to return to set, Natalie was required to complete the movie, including additional water scenes. The studio needed to finish the film. The budget couldn't absorb delays. Every time she saw water after that day, she panicked. She couldn't take baths without severe anxiety. Swimming pools filled her with dread. She developed a phobia so severe that friends and family learned never to pressure her near water. This wasn't just a scary moment. This terror would stay with Natalie Wood for 32 years. Every bath, Every pool, every trip near water would bring back that bridge collapsing beneath her. The feeling of going under, the sensation of water in her lungs, the panic of not being able to breathe. Her mother did something rare for that era. She sued the production company. Would a court actually hold Hollywood accountable? Or would studio lawyers make the case disappear? She won. The court found the studio negligent. But the settlement money went to Natalie's mother, not to Natalie herself. And Natalie was required to keep working. The terror she'd experienced, the lifelong phobia she'd developed, none of that mattered to the industry. For 32 years, Natalie lived with the water phobia created by that childhood accident. Nothing could fully overcome the terror that had been burned into her young mind on that film set. Friends knew about her fear. She would avoid boats whenever possible, would feel panic even standing near deep water. She tried therapy, hypnosis, and exposure treatment. Nothing worked. The fear remained. In 1981, at age 43, Natalie Wood lost her life in the water under circumstances that remain mysterious to this day. Her body was found in the water off Catalina Island. The case was reopened in 2011 as potentially suspicious. The child, who nearly drowned at age 10 because a studio used faulty equipment, who spent her entire life terrified of water because of what Hollywood had done to her, passed away in the very element that had traumatized her decades earlier. Studios kept detailed insurance records showing exactly how many child actors were injured on their sets each year. They had actuarial tables calculating the average cost of child injuries versus the cost of comprehensive safety measures. Records show 47 child actors were treated for on-set injuries at major studios in 1947 alone. Time and again, studios chose to accept the injuries as a cost of doing business. Modern safety regulations for child actors exist because children like Natalie Wood paid the price with their bodies and their psychological well-being. If you're discovering the truth behind Hollywood's golden age for the first time, subscribe to Golden Age Files. We're uncovering the stories the studios tried to bury. And what we reveal in Thing 9 about the medications they gave these children will shock you even more. They starved children and controlled their bodies. Every Monday morning, dozens of child stars stepped on scales in studio nurse offices. Weight gain, even 1 pound, meant consequences. But what exactly did studios do when a child's body didn't match their ideal? And how young were these children when the body control began? Studios treated child actors' bodies as commodities to be managed and controlled. Weekly weigh-ins were mandatory. Weight gain, even normal, healthy growth, could trigger suspension or contract termination. Studio doctors prescribed appetite suppressants to minors. Children were praised for dangerous thinness and shamed when their bodies looked healthy. Teenage Mickey Rooney faced weekly weigh-ins at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Every Monday morning, he stepped on the scale, knowing there would be consequences if the number had gone up. Studios wanted him small, boyish, eternally youthful. They wanted him to stop growing. Studio personnel gave him appetite suppressants during his critical adolescent growth years. Every bite he ate was tracked and controlled. He learned to lie about being hungry, to hide when he felt weak or dizzy. One Monday morning, the scale showed he'd gained 2 pounds. Just 2 pounds of normal teenage growth. The studio nurse wrote the number on her clipboard. She frowned. She picked up the phone and called upstairs. Mickey watched her lips move as she spoke quietly into the receiver. Studio executives called an emergency meeting. His mother was summoned to the lot immediately. She arrived within 20 minutes, her face pale, her hands clutching her purse. Behind closed doors, they discussed whether to suspend his contract, whether Mickey was still profitable, whether his body was betraying the boyish image that had made him valuable. Mickey stood outside that office, hearing adults debate his worth based on 2 pounds. He pressed his ear to the door, listening to executives discuss his future, his body, his value. He heard one executive say, "We can't have another Andy Hardy picture with him looking like this. The audience expects Andy to stay young forever." Another voice, "Maybe we should consider recasting." He was 14 years old. He stood there listening to adults discuss replacing him, and he felt his stomach drop. His throat tightened. Mickey Rooney stood 5 feet 2 inches tall as an adult. While genetics played a role, he later revealed that studios gave him medications to suppress his appetite and carefully restricted his nutrition during the exact years when his body desperately needed fuel to grow. He yo-yo dieted his entire adult life. never able to develop a normal relationship with eating because Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer had taught him that hunger was virtue and eating was failure requiring punishment. He wasn't alone. Elizabeth Taylor was placed under diet monitoring beginning in her early teenage years. She was praised when she skipped meals and criticized when she appeared healthy. Natalie Wood faced criticism for normal teenage weight gain during puberty. Even Shirley Temple wasn't exempt from body control. Studio personnel monitored her diet from early childhood. Studio nurses maintained weight charts for every child actor under contract. They documented acceptable ranges for each child. Any child who exceeded these arbitrary limits faced immediate consequences: reduced roles, public shaming, suspension from work, sometimes contract termination. The message: your natural body is unacceptable. Your worth depends entirely on your appearance. Adolescent girls in the middle of puberty were placed on severe calorie restriction. Growing boys were given chemical appetite suppressants. Children as young as 9 years old learned that feeling hungry was good, that eating was weakness, that their natural physical forms were shameful. The body control rewired these children's brains during critical formative years. Elizabeth Taylor's weight struggles were public and painful, documented in tabloids for decades. She traced her disordered eating directly to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's control during her developmental years. Natalie Wood struggled with body image and eating patterns throughout her adult life. They denied children real education. Baby Peggy made 150 films between the ages of 2 and 6, earning over $1 million. She traveled the world, met presidents, and lived in mansions. But in 1944, at age 23, something happened on a date that exposed the darkest secret about child star education. She went to dinner with a young man who later became her husband. He handed her the menu. She stared at it for a long moment, her eyes moving across the words, but not understanding them. The letters blurred together. She felt her face flush with embarrassment. Her heart pounded. She pretended to study the menu, turning it this way and that, hoping something would make sense. She even tilted her head, as if a different angle might help. She squinted. Then she quietly asked him to order for her. He thought she was being demure, letting him take charge like women were expected to in 1944. He smiled, charmed by what he thought was old-fashioned modesty. But that wasn't it. What couldn't Baby Peggy do that almost every other 23-year-old could? She couldn't read the menu. This woman who'd been famous since age 2, who'd earned over $1 million, who'd traveled the world and met presidents, couldn't read a restaurant menu at age 23. How does this happen? California law eventually required 3 hours of schooling per day for working child actors, less than half what regular students received. But even this minimal requirement was routinely ignored. Studios hired the cheapest teachers willing to work in chaotic on-set environments. Teachers faced impossible conditions, teaching multiple children of wildly different ages simultaneously, working in cramped trailers, dealing with constant interruptions. Teachers were pressured to pass every child regardless of whether actual learning had occurred. A teacher who failed a child star could delay production schedules. That teacher would be fired. Education was always the first thing sacrificed when filming ran late, which happened almost daily. Studios kept children on set for 16 hours, but claimed the child had opportunities for education during breaks. Enforcement was minimal. Baby Peggy received almost no formal education while making 150 films. As an adult in her 20s, she had to teach herself to write. Imagine being 25 years old, sitting alone at a desk with a children's primer, slowly sounding out words, painstakingly learning what other children had mastered by age 6 or 7. She cried often during those lessons, humiliated by what had been stolen from her. She'd been robbed of more than money. She'd been robbed of the basic tools to navigate adult life. When Carl Switzer's Our Gang career ended at age 16, he possessed perhaps a 6th grade education. No high school diploma, no vocational training. He couldn't pursue other careers because he lacked the basic education to even fill out job applications properly. He'd try to fill in the forms, staring at questions he couldn't understand, then give up in frustration when he couldn't spell the words or comprehend what was being asked. Mickey Rooney received minimal formal education at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. He could memorize pages of dialogue in minutes. His verbal memory was extraordinary. But he couldn't handle basic mathematics beyond simple arithmetic. He couldn't write coherent business correspondence without help. The contrast haunted him. Even Shirley Temple, who later became a United States ambassador, proving she possessed significant intelligence, received grossly inadequate education during her child star years. She had to essentially educate herself as a young adult. Her success was a testament to her determination, not to anything Hollywood had done. Educated child stars might read and understand the contracts they were signing. They might question unfair terms or dangerous conditions. They might have career options outside Hollywood. Keeping children dependent and undereducated ensured they had nowhere else to go. No way to evaluate whether their treatment was acceptable. Former child stars reached adulthood unable to read contracts they were signing, unable to manage money they earned, unable to transition to other careers when acting work dried up. They trapped children in slave contracts. When child stars or their parents realized the extent of the mistreatment, could they simply walk away? Or were they trapped? Standard child star contracts were 7 years long, renewable at the studio's sole option. Parents signed these contracts on behalf of minors who were often too young to even write their own names. Once signed, breaking them was nearly impossible without destroying the child's career and facing financial devastation. The contracts were deliberately designed with ironclad clauses that gave studios absolute power while leaving families with none. Here's what studios could do. Studios could loan child actors to other studios without consent, essentially renting children out like equipment. The child had no say in which studio they worked for, what roles they performed, or under what conditions. Studios could suspend a child without pay for refusing any role, even if dangerous or inappropriate. A child who said, "I'm afraid of heights," or "that water scene scares me," could be suspended indefinitely. No work, no income, contract time frozen. Studios could control all publicity and statements. Every interview was approved, every public appearance was monitored, every photograph required permission. Studios could dictate working hours, 12, 14, even 18-hour days, 7 days a week. Child labor laws existed, but studios found ways around them or simply ignored them, knowing families were too dependent to complain. Studios could mandate physical appearance standards, including weight and hair color. They could require children to dye their hair, maintain specific measurements, even undergo cosmetic procedures. Studios could terminate a child's contract for unsuitable behavior, a phrase vague enough to mean anything. Being difficult meant asking for breaks. Being unprofessional meant complaining about conditions. Being unsuitable meant anything the studio wanted it to mean. Meanwhile, child stars couldn't work for competing studios. They couldn't take other acting jobs, couldn't pursue other opportunities, couldn't leverage their fame for better treatment. They couldn't refuse roles regardless of safety concerns, say yes or be suspended. They couldn't negotiate better terms even after becoming major stars. Jackie Coogan made millions, but had no ability to renegotiate his contract terms. Shirley Temple was the biggest box office draw in America, but couldn't negotiate better working conditions. They couldn't speak publicly about mistreatment without violating contract terms. Morality clauses and non-disclosure provisions meant speaking out was grounds for immediate termination and potential lawsuits. The contracts were designed to silence. When baby Peggy's father attempted to negotiate improved terms after his daughter had made millions for the studio, the response was swift. They dropped her immediately. No discussion, no negotiation, just termination. At age 6, her career ended because her father had dared to ask for better treatment. The studio made no effort to work with the family. They simply replaced her with the next child. Studios made an example of her family, sending a message to every other child star's parents. Don't ask for more, or you'll get nothing. The blacklisting was immediate and comprehensive. Other studios wouldn't touch her. Producers who'd worked with her before suddenly had no roles available. By age 7, baby Peggy was performing in vaudeville theaters, where audiences booed her as too old. She went from movie theaters to vaudeville circuits to county fairs, each venue smaller and more desperate than the last. She was 7 years old and considered a has-been. The girl who'd earned over $1 million was performing for small crowds who barely remembered her name. Mickey Rooney's Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer contract gave studios control over who he could date, where he could appear publicly, and his living arrangements. His contract specified that he would live where the studio determined, travel when permitted, and associate only with approved individuals. Studios even attempted to block him from joining the military during World War II because his contract meant they owned rights to his time. When Mickey expressed his intention to serve his country, MGM threatened legal action. They argued his contract superseded his patriotic duty. Only public pressure and the studio's fear of bad publicity forced them to relent. Even in wartime, even for military service, the studio claimed ownership of his time. Natalie Wood's contracts, signed by her mother when Natalie was far too young to comprehend, trapped her from age 4 through her teenage years. By the time she was old enough to understand what she'd been committed to, she had years remaining on contracts she'd never agreed to. She couldn't refuse uncomfortable roles that made her anxious. She couldn't negotiate for better pay despite becoming an enormously valuable star. Her mother had signed away her autonomy before she could read, and she spent her childhood and adolescence bound by terms she'd never chosen. Studios maintained blacklists of families they considered difficult. These weren't official documents, they were understood. Word spread through studio networks. A family that complained about safety was difficult. A parent who questioned working hours was unreasonable. A child who showed reluctance was unprofessional. Once a family appeared on these lists, they found themselves unable to work anywhere in Hollywood. Casting directors would suddenly have no roles available. Auditions would be mysteriously canceled. Phone calls wouldn't be returned. The message, stay silent or lose everything. And every family knew other families who'd been blacklisted, who'd gone from wealthy to desperate seemingly overnight. The contracts created an insidious trap. Families became financially dependent on a child's earnings. They bought houses and cars based on that income. They made financial commitments, mortgages, private schools for siblings, support for extended family. Once dependent, families couldn't afford to break contracts. Even if they wanted to protect their child, even if they saw the damage being done, they couldn't walk away without losing their home, their lifestyle, everything. Studios knew that once a family was hooked on the money, that family would tolerate almost anything. The financial dependency was intentional design. Keep them dependent, and they'll stay compliant. Even parents who desperately wanted to protect their children faced impossible choices. Stay silent about the dangerous stunts and long hours, or lose everything and potentially make things worse for your child by ending their career abruptly. Keep your child working despite knowing it's harmful, or face financial ruin and your child's resentment for ending their career. Some parents genuinely believed they were doing the right thing by not interfering. Others knew the damage but felt trapped. The contracts ensured that even loving parents became complicit in the exploitation because the alternative was complete financial destruction. They stole normal childhood experiences. Child stars worked 12 to 14-hour days, 6 or 7 days a week, starting as young as age 3 or 4. There were no weekends, no summer vacations, no birthday parties with school friends, only staged publicity events. No sleepovers, no school dances, no playground games, no Little League or Girl Scouts. Their only peers were other child actors, competitors fighting for the same limited roles. Every interaction carried rivalry. Befriending another child actor meant potentially losing a job to them. Real camaraderie was difficult. Adults on film sets were co-workers, not friends or mentors. Their interest in child stars was professional, not personal. Every interaction a child star had was supervised and evaluated for usefulness. Mothers and studio representatives assessed every friendship. Does this enhance the child's career? Genuine, purposeless friendship was nearly impossible to find. When child stars tried to play between takes, they faced harsh scolding. Running around might wrinkle costumes, playing might mess up makeup, getting dirty might delay production. So they learned to sit still, stay quiet, remain perfect and ready. On her 7th birthday, Shirley Temple experienced what passed for celebration. Studios arranged for a large cake to be brought to the set. It was 3 tiers tall, covered in pink frosting. Photographers gathered. Shirley was positioned in front of the cake, told to smile with delight, instructed to look surprised and happy. She performed joy on command while flashbulbs popped, the bright lights making her squint even as she held her smile. She could smell the frosting, could see the candles waiting to be lit. 7 candles. But this wasn't for her. Then, once the photographs were taken, the cake was removed. Shirley reached for a piece. She was hungry, and it was her birthday cake. But a studio assistant moved it away. "Not yet, sweetie. We need to keep your dress clean for the next scene." There was no actual party, no children her own age, no singing, no games, no unwrapping presents. Shirley went back to work, filming scenes for her next picture. She never got a piece of that cake. That was her 7th birthday, a staged event for publicity, not a real experience of childhood joy. Baby Peggy described watching through a window as neighborhood children played outside. They were running, laughing, chasing each other. She could hear their shouts and laughter through the glass. They were dirty and sweaty and having the time of their lives. She sat inside in costume and stage makeup, her legs dangling from a chair that was too tall for her, waiting for her next scene, forbidden from joining the children outside. O'Brien asked her mother if she could go. O'Brien asked her mother if she could go to a birthday party for a girl in her neighborhood. Her mother checked with the studio. The studio said no. Saturday was a shooting day. Margaret watched from her dressing room window as other children walked past with presents, heading to that party. She counted them as they went by. 7 children. 7 wrapped presents in bright paper. She tried to remember their faces so she could wave if she ever saw them again. She never got invited to another one. That moment, watching wrapped presents pass by while she sat in costume, stayed with her for 70 years. Mickey Rooney filmed 16 Andy Hardy movies in just 3 years, 18-hour days, 7 days a week. Years later, he summed up the cost. "I was a 14-year-old boy for 30 years. I never got to be 14. He never attended a school dance, never played pickup basketball, never did anything spontaneous without needing permission." His 8 marriages as an adult reflected something sadder than comedians acknowledged. Friends said he'd never learned what genuine intimacy looked like. Every childhood relationship had been transactional, managed, strategic. Natalie Wood started working at age 4 and never attended regular school. Every friendship she had was evaluated by her mother and studio representatives for career usefulness. Strategic social connections were encouraged. Purposeless friendship was discouraged. Decades later, in therapy, Natalie told her therapist she'd never felt like she fit in anywhere. She didn't know how to have casual friendships because every relationship in her formative years had been performative or strategic. Dependent, lonely children were easier to manage. Children with real friends outside the studio might resist more, might tell others about mistreatment. Children who had only studio-controlled relationships had no basis for comparison and no support system for resistance. Former child stars consistently described the feeling that they'd missed something essential that couldn't be recovered. You can learn to read as an adult. You can go to college later. But you can't recapture the developmental experiences of childhood. Learning to share, to navigate conflicts, to form your identity. Natalie Wood spent hundreds of hours in therapy trying to answer one question. Who am I when I'm not performing? She never found a satisfying answer. They created environments where predators had access to children. In 1940, 12-year-old Shirley Temple received a message that Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer producer Arthur Freed wanted to meet with her to discuss a possible role. Did Hollywood protect its youngest stars from adults who might harm them? Studios presented themselves publicly as wholesome family environments. But behind this facade, studios routinely sent child stars alone into private meetings with adult male executives behind closed doors. With men who could end a child's career with a word, who knew that children had been trained to be compliant. Studio management regularly directed child stars to report alone to executive offices. Studios exposed children to piles of fan mail that included predatory content from adult strangers. Studios did nothing to protect child stars from unwanted adult attention. Studios created power dynamics that made children perfect victims, trained to obey adults, economically dependent on pleasing executives, legally bound by contracts, taught that their job was to be agreeable. Shirley's meeting with Arthur Freed seemed like standard business. Her mother, who usually accompanied her, was told her presence wasn't necessary. The secretary assured Mrs. Temple it was just a quick casting discussion. It would only take a few minutes. Shirley arrived at Freed's office alone. She was 12 years old, wearing the dress her mother had picked out that morning. She knocked on the door. "Come in," a voice called. Freed closed the office door behind her. She heard the lock click. Then he behaved inappropriately toward her. Shirley, in shock, laughed nervously. It was the instinctive response of a bewildered, frightened child who didn't understand what was happening. Her nervous laughter was a defense mechanism, her brain's attempt to process something too adult and wrong to comprehend. Freed reacted with rage. His face turned red. He shouted at her, "Get out! Get out of my office!" What happened to Arthur Freed after this inappropriate conduct toward a 12-year-old child? Criminal charges? Career destruction? Would he face any consequences at all? He immediately had Shirley banned from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer for not taking the meeting seriously and for her inappropriate response. A 12-year-old child who'd experienced this misconduct had behaved inappropriately by laughing in shock. He suffered no consequences. She was punished. Shirley's parents found out. 20th Century Fox learned about the incident. They all reached the same conclusion: say nothing publicly. Revealing what Freed had done might make Shirley seem difficult. It might damage her image. It might cost the family their income. So everyone agreed to stay silent. Shirley went back to work, smiling for cameras, performing the role of the happy child, all while carrying the knowledge that a powerful adult had acted inappropriately toward her and she'd been blamed. She'd learned a lesson. Powerful adults could do anything to you, and you would be punished if you reacted any way other than silent compliance. Arthur Freed continued working at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer for decades. 3 years later, while 12-year-old Shirley was being blamed for her reaction to this misconduct, Arthur Freed was being handed millions to produce Singin' in the Rain. In 1952, he won the Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award, the Academy's highest honor for producers. That award sits in a museum today, with Arthur Freed's name on it. Shirley Temple waited 48 years to say his name in public. His name is on an Academy Award after 3 years. He won awards and acclaim. His career never suffered. The industry protected him completely. Shirley didn't speak publicly about what Freed had done until 1988, 48 years later, long after Freed had passed away. For nearly half a century, she'd carried that secret, unable to speak safely. Natalie Wood later reported to trusted friends that she had experienced inappropriate conduct from a major star when she was a teenager. According to her sister Lana Wood, her mother Maria allegedly knew and did nothing. Natalie's career came first. She passed away in 1981 without ever publicly identifying who had harmed her. Major child stars received over 1,000 pieces of fan mail per week. A disturbing percentage was inappropriate or predatory from adult men. Studios read this mail, meaning they were fully aware their child stars were objects of adult predatory attention. Yet they did nothing meaningful to protect children. Studios knew that child stars were vulnerable. Studios knew that sending children alone into private offices with powerful men created opportunities for misconduct. Studios maintained these practices anyway, because protecting children was less important than maintaining relationships with executives who made the studios money. When inappropriate behavior occurred, studios protected the perpetrators. Powerful men continued working. Children were silenced, blamed, or blacklisted. They controlled every aspect of children's private lives. Mickey Rooney's studio-arranged first kiss made photographs around the world. But what photographers didn't capture happened 5 minutes earlier. Backstage, a studio executive gave Mickey specific instructions. Put your hand here. Turn your head this way. When I say go, count to 3 and kiss her. Neither Mickey nor the girl had ever kissed anyone before. They were performing romance by direction, like choreographing a dance number. Mickey's hands were trembling. He didn't know where to look. The girl's mother stood nearby, adjusting her daughter's dress, coaching her to tilt her head just so. This wasn't a moment. It was a product. Studios controlled child stars' friendships, dating, family visits, school choices, living arrangements, and public behavior. Every aspect of private life became studio property. Children were coached word for word on what to say in interviews and taught to lie about how happy their lives were. They rehearsed spontaneity. They practiced authentic laughter. They memorized stories about home life that never happened. Studios hired publicists to write completely fabricated fan magazine articles, birthday parties that never happened, family dinners that were staged photo shoots, friendships that didn't exist. The articles described beloved pets the child had never owned, hobbies they'd never tried, favorite foods they'd never tasted. Mickey Rooney couldn't date without studio approval. When he wanted to take a girl to the movies, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer investigated her background. Who was her father? What did he do? Would this association enhance or damage Mickey's wholesome image? The studio maintained files on potential dates. Studios often said no without explanation. When they said yes, the date itself was monitored. Where they went, what they talked about, whether photographers should be tipped off. Even his emotions were managed. Showing genuine anger or sadness might damage his all-American boy image. He learned to smile on command, to suppress frustration, to perform contentment he didn't feel. When Shirley Temple's grandmother passed away, the 8-year-old wanted to cry at the funeral. It was her grandmother, the woman who'd held her before the cameras ever did. Studio publicists said no. Photographers might see her, and crying would damage her image as America's little darling. Grief was unmarketable. She sat stone-faced through her grandmother's funeral, performing even in grief. Her mother sat beside her, occasionally squeezing her hand as a warning when tears threatened. After the service, back in the car, Shirley finally cried, quietly, so no one would hear. Natalie Wood's mother, Maria, pushed Natalie toward useful social connections from childhood. By 16, Natalie was being encouraged to date older men for career advancement. These weren't teenagers. They were established actors, directors, producers, decades her senior. Every friendship was evaluated. Every social interaction had a strategic purpose. Maria kept notes on who Natalie spent time with, which relationships might lead to better roles, which associations should be quietly discouraged. Natalie learned to assess people by their usefulness. She learned that relationships were transactions. The studio control extended beyond public appearances into supposedly private moments. Child stars' letters were read before being mailed. Phone calls were monitored. Even their bedrooms and studio housing were subject to inspection. Some studios required children to live in studio-approved housing rather than with their families, ensuring complete control over their environment. The message was clear. You have no private self. You are always our product. Children didn't know when they were performing and when they weren't. Was this conversation real? Or was mom reporting back to the studio? Was this person genuinely interested in friendship or gathering information for the publicity department? Were their own feelings authentic? Or had they been coached to feel this way? The blurring of performance and reality during critical identity formation years created adults who didn't know who they were. They'd spent their entire developmental period being whatever adults wanted them to be. They'd never been allowed to discover their authentic selves. Mickey Rooney later said that moment, being told exactly how to kiss someone for the first time, damaged his ability to experience genuine romantic feelings. He spent the rest of his life wondering if any of his relationships were real or just more performances. When he felt attraction, was it real or rehearsed? When he said, "I love you," had he been taught to say it? Or did he mean it? He'd been directed through his first kiss, his first date, his first relationship. Where did the performance end and the real Mickey begin? He never found out. They gave children medication to control. When they worked and slept. When child stars worked 18-hour days for months on end, how did studios keep them energetic and functional? The answer, pharmaceutical control of children's bodies without consent, is what Hollywood fought hardest to keep hidden. Studios demanded impossible production schedules. Mickey Rooney's Andy Hardy series filmed 16 complete movies in just 3 years. Shirley Temple made 4 or 5 films per year at her peak. These schedules required children to work 18-hour days, 7 days a week, for months without meaningful breaks. Young bodies naturally can't sustain this. When natural limitations threatened production schedules, studios found a solution. Studio doctors, physicians employed by studios, began prescribing amphetamines to child performers to keep them energetic during long days, and barbiturates to make them sleep at night when the amphetamines made natural sleep impossible. Then more amphetamines the next morning to restart the cycle. In his 1991 autobiography and in multiple interviews, Mickey Rooney revealed what Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer had done to him starting when he was a young teenager. Studio-employed doctors gave him amphetamines to keep him energized during brutal filming schedules. When the stimulants made it impossible to fall asleep, they gave him barbiturates. The next morning, unable to wake naturally after medicated sleep, they'd give him more amphetamines. Day after day, month after month, year after year during his formative teenage years. A studio nurse would appear at his dressing room door each morning with a small paper cup containing pills. "Take these now, Mickey. You've got a long day ahead." He'd swallow them without question. By mid-morning, he'd feel the pills kick in. His pulse would quicken. By lunch, he'd feel unnaturally energized, almost jittery, his heart racing, his hands trembling slightly. By evening, he'd be exhausted but unable to sleep, his mind racing even as his body screamed for rest. That's when they'd give him the second cup of pills. Studio doctors controlled when Mickey was awake, when he slept, how much energy he had, even his moods, all without his informed consent, without his parents' knowledge in many cases. Studio doctors didn't need parental consent to prescribe these substances to minors. They simply handed out pills like vitamins. Take these when you get to work. Take these other ones when you're told to go to bed. The children, trained to obey adults, took what they were given without questioning. In 2011, when he was 90 years old, Mickey Rooney testified before the United States Congress about mistreatment in Hollywood. He sat before lawmakers and told them exactly what had been done to him. He specifically referenced how studios had controlled him with pharmaceuticals when he was a teenager. These weren't vitamin pills. These were controlled substances given to teenagers, rewiring their brains during the exact years when addiction patterns form. Mickey Rooney would struggle with substance dependency for 60 more years because of what Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's doctors did to him at age 15. He spent his entire adult life battling dependencies that began with those morning paper cups of pills. Mickey later confirmed this practice extended well beyond just him. Studios had discovered they could use pharmaceuticals to make children's bodies work longer hours. It was cheaper than respecting natural limitations. Judy Garland revealed that Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer had given her exactly the same treatment. Amphetamines to work, barbiturates to sleep, starting when she was 13 during the filming of The Wizard of Oz. Two major child stars, the same studio, the same chemical control. This wasn't a rogue doctor. This was studio policy. Studios documented medication distribution in medical files, but families often never saw these records. Many parents didn't learn until years later what had actually been done to their children. What Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer did to Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland would be considered child mistreatment today. In the 1940s and 50s, it was standard practice, hidden from public view. The chemical control rewired developing brains during critical years. Many child stars struggled with dependency as adults, dependencies that began with studio-supplied medications in adolescence. They provided no support. When child stars aged out. On January 21st, 1959, a child star lost his life over $50. Carl "Alfalfa" Switzer, a face every American knew from our gang, passed away broke and desperate at age 31. How does this happen? Let's go back to 1935. Child star careers always end. Children grow up. The cute 7-year-old becomes an awkward 14-year-old. Studios knew this pattern. They'd seen it happen to hundreds of young performers. Yet they provided zero transition support. Once a child stopped being profitable, studios severed all connection. Between 1935 and 1940, Carl "Alfalfa" Switzer was one of the most recognizable faces in America as part of our gang. Every child in the country knew his distinctive voice, his permanently mussed hair, his terrible off-key singing. He appeared in 61 comedy shorts, bringing laughter to millions. His parents controlled every cent of his earnings. They spent the money on the family's lifestyle. They assumed Alfalfa's career would continue indefinitely. They made no effort to save money for their son's future. At age 16, everything stopped. Alfalfa wasn't cute anymore. He'd grown into an awkward teenager. He was just a regular-looking teenage boy, and regular-looking teenage boys were not what audiences paid to see. Hollywood had no use for him. He couldn't get acting work because everyone saw him only as Alfalfa the Kid. Casting directors couldn't see past the image. When he walked into auditions, directors would shake their heads before he even read lines. Some laughed, some looked embarrassed for him. So even though he had years of professional experience, he was effectively unemployable in the only career he'd ever known. His brother Harold later confirmed what happened to the money. Their parents spent every cent. At age 16, Carl Switzer had no money in the bank, no education beyond 6th grade, and no skills other than acting in comedy shorts nobody wanted. He took whatever jobs he could find. Bartender, serving drinks to people who recognized him and made cruel comments about how far he'd fallen. Hunting guide, dog breeding. He kept attempting to get small acting roles, but he was typecast and frequently mocked at auditions. The little boy America had loved had become a punchline. By his mid-20s, Carl Switzer was broke, divorced, and estranged from his own child. The little boy who had brought joy to millions was living in a rented room, working odd jobs, barely scraping by. On January 21st, 1959, Carl Alfalfa Switzer got into an argument over a debt of approximately $50. The other man owed him money for a hunting dog, $50. The argument escalated. Voices were raised. Neighbors heard shouting through the walls. During the confrontation, violence erupted. Carl Switzer lost his life. He was 31 years old. The child star who'd earned tens of thousands, who'd been famous across America, passed away, broke over the equivalent of a tank of gas. His parents had spent his childhood earnings. Hollywood had given him essentially no education. Studios had provided zero transition support. The system had extracted maximum value from him during his cute years, then discarded him. Carl Switzer never had a realistic chance at a stable adult life. From age 7 to 12, he was extraordinarily valuable. From 12 to 31, he was struggling to survive. At 31, he was gone over pocket change. Baby Peggy's career ended at age 6 when she aged out of baby roles. Her family went from wealthy to bankrupt overnight. Multiple other children from our gang faced similar struggles. Norman Chubby Chaney passed away at age 18. The pattern was consistent. Childhood fame leading to sudden career termination, followed by complete absence of support, resulting in adult struggle and often tragedy. Even Mickey Rooney, despite working fairly consistently as an adult actor, filed for bankruptcy multiple times. He'd never learned financial management because adults had controlled every aspect of his life during his formative years. Studios knew child stars would struggle after aging out. They had decades of examples. They chose to do nothing because once children stopped generating profit, they ceased to matter. They silenced anyone who tried to speak out: financial theft, dangerous physical conditions, body control and starvation, educational denial, legal entrapment, stolen childhood experiences, exposure to predators, chemical control, abandonment without support. But how did these practices remain hidden for so long? Studios maintained comprehensive systems to silence anyone who tried to expose what was happening. Every child star contract included morality clauses that could be interpreted to punish speaking publicly. Studios maintained industry-wide blacklists. Studios controlled media access through advertising revenue, ensuring that journalists who wrote critical stories would find themselves cut off. Studio legal teams crushed lawsuits through delay, intimidation, and financial attrition. Studios employed fixers whose job was to bury scandals. Anyone who tried to expose mistreatment faced professional destruction. The message: speak out and you'll never work in Hollywood again. Studios actively created false narratives. Fan magazines published only studio-approved content. Articles gushed about how happy child stars were. Journalists who attempted honest pieces found their stories eliminated by editors who couldn't afford to anger the studios. When families complained, they were quietly blacklisted. The blacklist system made organized resistance impossible. Each family was isolated and terrified that speaking up would cost them everything. The power imbalance was overwhelming. Studios were multi-million-dollar corporations with teams of attorneys. Families were individuals trying to protect their children while dependent on studio income. The silence wasn't because people didn't know. Crew members saw the long hours and dangerous conditions. Other actors witnessed inappropriate behavior. But challenging the system meant professional destruction. Notice the pattern of when survivors felt safe speaking out. Shirley Temple revealed Arthur Freed's misconduct in 1988, 48 years later, long after Freed had passed away and couldn't retaliate. Mickey Rooney testified about chemical control in 2011 when he was 90, decades after Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer had ceased to exist. Baby Peggy began speaking in the 1970s after the studio system had collapsed. These delayed revelations weren't cowardice. They were surviving. Speaking out during the studio system's peak meant career destruction, potential lawsuits, being blacklisted across the entire industry. Survivors waited until it was safe, until the people who'd harmed them were gone, until the power structures had changed, until they no longer had anything left to lose. Their courage in finally speaking led to the reforms that exist today. Baby Peggy spent 80 years advocating for child actor protections. Mickey Rooney testified before Congress. Shirley Temple's decision to name Arthur Freed helped break the silence. But their delayed testimony raises an uncomfortable question. What's still being silenced today? What current mistreatment will only be revealed decades from now when current child performers finally feel safe enough to speak? Which of these 11 revelations shocked you most? And what other Golden Age Hollywood topics should we explore in future videos? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your suggestions guide our research. These weren't isolated incidents. They were 11 practices that Hollywood used on virtually every child star. From stolen fortunes to chemical control, from predators given access to slave contracts, studios created a machine designed to extract maximum profit from children while providing zero protection. Every reform that exists today protecting child actors exists because children like Jackie Coogan, Baby Peggy, Mickey Rooney, Shirley Temple, Natalie Wood, and Carl Switzer paid the price with their childhoods, their health, their futures, and sometimes their lives. Baby Peggy spent 80 years fighting to prevent it from happening to others. She lived to 101, passing away in 2020 after nearly a century of turning her trauma into protection for other children. Jackie Coogan's lawsuit may not have restored his stolen fortune, but the Coogan law it inspired has protected hundreds of other children from identical financial devastation. Shirley Temple's courage in naming Arthur Freed helped break the silence around Hollywood's protection of predators and encouraged other survivors to speak. Mickey Rooney's testimony before Congress at age 90 educated lawmakers about exploitation that continued in modified forms and gave voice to survivors who'd been silenced for decades. These weren't just tragic figures. They were warriors who fought back against a system designed to use and discard them. Their suffering wasn't meaningless. It created change. Incomplete change, imperfect protections, but real progress that continues to evolve. When we watch these classic films today, we watch with full knowledge of what those performances cost. We can admire the artistry while understanding the exploitation. We remember not just their performances, but their courage in eventually speaking the truth, their decades of advocacy, their transformation of personal pain into public protection. These children deserved better. They deserved safety, education, fair compensation, normal childhoods, and preparation for adult life. They deserved to be protected rather than exploited. The industry failed them deliberately in service of profit. But these children also showed remarkable resilience. Against overwhelming odds, many built meaningful lives after Hollywood. Some became advocates ensuring future generations faced better treatment. Others found peace far from the cameras that had defined their childhoods. Their survival and their eventual willingness to speak truth represent victories over the system that tried to silence them. We honor their memory by refusing to forget what was done to them, by staying vigilant against similar exploitation in current entertainment, by supporting reforms that strengthen protections for child performers, by teaching new generations that profit never justifies harm to children. If these revelations have changed how you see Hollywood's golden age, share this video with others who remember these stars and deserve to know their complete stories. These children fought to be heard. The least we can do is ensure they're never forgotten. Thank you for watching Golden Age Files. Subscribe to continue exploring the untold stories from cinema's most glamorous and troubled era. These weren't just Hollywood legends. They were real children who deserved protection they never received. We remember their art, we honor their courage, and we stay vigilant so history doesn't repeat itself.